Good morning, folks. I'm going to start with a couple of comments about our MIT Alumni Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Network, which is presenting this webinar today. I see the number of attendants is getting up near what we were hoping to see. It's been great to see the registrations. We call it EESN, Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Network, and we're dedicated to informing and educating people about all those three issues, those topics. We often call it climate today. And we then are committed to connecting alumni of MIT. Other people are more than welcome to join us, but there just is so much power in MIT alumni and us collaborating on things that the third part of our mission is to get alumni together to start actions and projects and things that will actually help us transition to what I love to call a sustainable future. This webinar is set up in a webinar mode. The audience will not be able to chat. We will, though, have some chat information from our speakers and panelists that will be put out in what is the normal chat window. And what we're asking you to do is, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A section. That would be absolutely great. Because we do have about 20 minutes at the end when we will be taking questions and comments from people. We'd prefer to have questions from comments, but feel free to put questions in that will relate to specific interest of yours. We're delighted that there was an American wake-up call when the IPCC came out with its 2018 report. It sort of renewed a bunch of activity that had been dormant for almost a decade. We now know that we Americans in the Western world, we Americans use almost 3 times the energy that we probably need, and that the rest of the world has not necessarily caught up there. So in the grand scheme of things, we've seen the electric vehicle markets and the electric grid starting to respond to what we need to do to stop global warming. But the building sector is very unique in that, not unique, it's one of our more important problems to attack at this point. The stock of buildings is long-term. The people in areas that need cooling may not have good buildings for using energy for cooling. Hopefully fans will help a little bit if they get electricity. But buildings are a key piece of how we will get to net zero by 2050. And our 2 speakers are talking about how it can be done. So with that, I'd like to introduce our chair of the webinar committee, who I'm sure will welcome any of you to volunteer with ideas and helping to set up our next monthly webinars. Ramon Bueno, class of 74. He'll introduce our speakers, who will speak for about 12, 13 minutes each. And after the 2 speakers, we will then start looking through the questions that you have put to us. So on to the topic of today. Ramon.
Thank you, Sarah. And welcome to everyone. It's been very encouraging to see the number of registrations and now attendees rising to a good level. And also thank you to all to Moana Benton and Daniel Reddy from the MIT Alumni Association for the support that makes this possible. First, today we're going to hear from Harvey Michaels discussing a recent study from the MIT System Dynamics group on the economics and pathways for electrifying heating at large scale in cold climates. A very important topic around here, for sure. Harvey is a class of 74 MIT, master's in 75. He enjoys being a faculty member at MIT as a Sloan School lecturer on energy management and innovation, and he's a principal investigator at EESI's, that's the Environmental Solutions Initiative, the Cities and Climate Change Program. He teaches about energy and climate innovation while investigating climate plan initiatives for cities, state, and federal government. He's done a lot of things. He also engages in environmental justice advocacy, and before returning to MIT in 2008, he led an energy efficiency company for years, and he's served in various advisory committees and boards. So we're glad to have him here. Then Nikhil Nadkarni will describe what the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts is doing to implement low carbon building heating in the near future and share some observations from the heating transformation in Germany. He is from the class of 2007, and then a master's in city planning in 2012. He's an energy planner for the city of Cambridge, focusing on policy and programs on energy efficiency, electrification, building decarb, topic today. And this includes initiatives on clean heating, retrofits for buildings, and microgrids. In Germany, he researched their energy transformation, drawing some lessons that may be applicable for US cities in decarbonizing buildings. He's also worked for the City of Boston's Environmental Department on energy benchmarking, climate planning, and the Innovative Building Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance, named otherwise known as BERDO. So we're very pleased and very lucky to have them both join us today. So welcome, Harvey and Nikhil.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Did I unmute? Okay, good. It's a pleasure and it's a privilege. Thank you, classmate 74, Ramon, and Sarah for inviting me to join. I'm pleased to be able to talk today about a recent examination we've done on heat pumps, particularly, and how they can be applied at scale in a cold climate like Massachusetts to do what we need to do from the standpoint of climate. And so let me, just a little trouble here getting set up. Okay, good. So let me start with a name, which is being on time on the road to climate neutrality. When we address space heat and colder climates, there was a reference Sarah made to the 2018 IPCC work. The 2021 report that came out put a real sharp point on it. To get where we need to go, we need carbon neutrality. Carbon balance and neutrality occurs at about 85% carbon reduction. So that's not minor in the developed world, from 17.5 tons, which is what we use, to 2.7 tons. When people complain about the third world not doing as much, they're starting just around 2.7 tons. So it isn't, they don't have as far to go. But 85%, you can do that in a lot of different ways. There are formulas to get there. And one of the things is you don't have to do it in the same level between grid and buildings and transportation. But it's a good place to start. What can you do to get 85% in all three? The trick is, when is it necessary? So I don't know how many of you saw the movie Don't Look Up. So fortunately, as a society, we are beginning to look up. I've actually used the analog of an asteroid speeding to Earth that was going to hit in the US as a teaching vehicle for about 10 years. And perhaps they heard that. But this movie basically puts an analog to climate change. So I think we are looking up. The question is, doing it, can we bring the elements together to actually solve the problem? To do it, we have to get 85% by about 2045, but 50% by 2030. It's a cumulative problem. So one of the real challenges in doing it is that it's not a central solution only. It requires big numbers quickly. And it's nice teaching in the Sloan School now, because I have all these great minds and thinkers about how to address markets and to see if we can get the rapid change we need. And we also, in Massachusetts, have a great policy support from the state, which was an early adopter of energy efficiency and climate, and sued the EPA for carbon to be considered a gas under a hazardous gas in the Clean Air Act of 1970 successfully. That made a lot of the things we're doing possible. In March 26, we passed a great roadmap law that requires us to get to 50% by 2030, our fair share, and has 5-year targets by sector coming out in this July. Also, a number of other things. We can come back in the Q&A to some of them, including the held off Transportation Climate Initiative, utility regulatory rework, and end of gas planning, which is very relevant to what we're talking about today. In MIT, some of you may have seen En-ROADS and be aware of the MIT Climate Pathways project. This is applying system dynamics to look at the problem of climate, and it's great that there and other places around MIT, we're rolling up our sleeves and seeing if we can find the solution space to actually meet the needs in time. But it's really been my privilege to work with and learn from the students I've had in this late career opportunity at MIT, including a group that you see on the bottom, which went to the White House in 2012 and won the Better Buildings Case competition with a lot of great ideas. And the one second from the right is Nikhil Nadkarni, who is the next speaker. So I'm going to teach for a minute and basically make sure we know a little bit about heat pumps. So I'm going to put my teacher hat on, and I'll have to take it off in just a couple minutes. So it will be a little bit of a fire hose. But I just want to make sure we all can talk about this directly. These pictures on the top are a typical heat pump installed today called a ductless mini split. They probably look kind of familiar. The heat goes in on the outside and comes out on the end of the wall. And a heat pump is sort of like a sponge for heat. It's not a new invention. If you have a really old refrigerator, it's still a heat pump. And the thing that's nice about a heat pump is that when you're making heat, it's way over 100% efficient, which is possible because it's moving heat. It's not making heat. So a typical heat pump, if you use it all year round, is about a coefficient of performance of 3, which is essentially 300% efficient. A ground source heat pump could have a coefficient of performance of 5. At Boston prices, you really need to be over 4 in order to be cheaper all year round with a heat pump as compared with using gas. And over 3 against oil and propane, which is about where we are. So that's kind of a wash, but gas is a challenge. So this is what we're starting with. Our study is looking at a transition to how do we get lots of heat pumps, which is what we need for climate, in a short amount of time. The plan that the state put together called for 1 million heat pumps, 1 million new homes out of the 2.5 million in the state, 40%, putting in a heat pump over the next 10 years. And this seems like a difficult task ahead. It gets front page of the Globe sometime about how difficult it is. But the bottom line on the work is that it looks like it's possible to do it, and in a way that everybody's happy about it and nobody's sacrificing about it, and the grid can handle it. And this is what is really great about system dynamics, is that we can bring these elements together and look at them together. I think my colleague Rob Nachtrieb is on the audience today. Who was a partner doing system dynamics modeling in support of this project. And I appreciate it. And I'm not sure if our MIT graduate Judy Chang, who's the Undersecretary for Climate for the state, who's been an important partner in helping us think about these things, is on the line. So this study is essentially examining, how do we get 1 million? I'm not out buying one heat pump and considering how it works. I'm out buying 1 million of them, and how will it work in a system dynamics setting between now and 2030 in a state like Massachusetts? There's a trick. There's only one way it can work, which is that we have hybrid systems, systems that use the heat pump most of the time, but they use another source for heat some of the time on the extremely cold hours. And that's really the key to thinking about getting the heat pump concentration we need. Otherwise, we run out of grid space at about 300,000 all winter cold weather heat pumps, which is way short of the 1 million that we need. So it's this hybrid heat strategy that allows us to get to a solution. So if I had a whiteboard, I've started building these things because we've done a lot of online classes over the last 2 years. I start drawing a chart of the temperature on the outside from 0 to 100, and the percentage of the natural gas cost per hour from 0 to 100, and drew a few lines. What happens is it's a linear relationship between gas cost and outside temperature as it drops. And in Texas, that's as cold as it gets, except last winter. And this is how cold it typically gets here. If you have heat pumps, you can get to this typical outside Texas point, mostly cheaper. And in the summer, you get your air conditioning. So that's very common in Texas. When you get a really cold year like last year, you're in trouble. Cold weather heat pumps do much better, but they have a place where they become a little bit more expensive than the gas system, that tail. Ground source heat pumps do great. They're cheaper than gas all year round, and they bring down air conditioning as well. So last teaching chart, here's a bunch of coefficient of performance lines going from 0 degrees outside to 70 degrees outside. And the challenge of heat pumps is that the efficiency drops as the temperature gets colder, which is absolutely the opposite of what you want, because buildings need more heat as they get colder. And so you get this challenging area at the bottom. We call this the green zone up here, where it's really easy, above 35 degrees. The yellow zone between 15 degrees and 35 degrees. And the red zone down here where it's below 15 degrees, which has happened twice in the last week in Massachusetts, so it happens. We're learning, I have to give this pretty quick look, right? We're learning that the green zone is a place where everybody wins. And the heat pump industry is learning to sell you heat pumps instead of air conditioning. It hardly costs any more. And that's a place where we can clearly get $1 million, because people are buying ductless mini splits like crazy for air conditioning, and they always come as heat pumps as well. We have the yellow zone, which is more challenging. It's a place where we need policy to support it, so this problem of gas costing more in that zone can be addressed, which it can be with rates. And then there's a red zone where it's difficult. If we have an extremely efficient home, or if we do something new and different, we can find a way to have heat pumps work all winter long. So we're building a set of insights that the green zone, people want air conditioning, it's a big driver. The yellow zone, we need to get our policy right. Red zone, we need some R&D in order to get that last mile. I'm thinking of the red zone like on a football field, not like stop, like it's the last 20 yards, we got to get across the line. So the bottom line of our work so far is that $1 million is achievable. There will be a rush where people will run towards getting ductless mini split heat pumps for their home, for air conditioning, and get heat as well. And we can probably get about 25% of heating system replacements. It helps if we get thermal efficiency upgrades. We need to avoid electric resistance backup. And then we have to move on to technology improvements. Meanwhile, we need the markets to be able to adopt so that people understand. And that's how we'll get to the solution. So here's the bottom line. I learned from Anthony Lazarowicz, so I credit him, but other people have described the truth about climate change in 10 words. And so the first 8 are: it's real, it's us, it's bad, and scientists agree. And so we've had things like En-ROADS to explain this, Greta Thunberg bringing everyone out to understand it. And the thing that I think we can add at MIT with the work we're doing is there's hope. And that's my hope is largely the people that MIT is training and putting out the door that are now picking up the baton and getting this work done. And that's my message. Thank you.
Great. And now on to Nikhil, if you're ready.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, are you able to see my screen? Okay, thank you, Ramon. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikhil Nadkarni. Thanks so much to Sarah and Ramon for hosting and the MIT Alumni Association team. I'm a energy planner at the city of Cambridge, and I had the opportunity to also conduct a research sabbatical in Germany looking at the German energy transition and some of the lessons that could be applied to US cities. And so I'll try to weave these components together from Cambridge and research in Berlin in a couple of sections in the next few minutes. So part one, let's start with the context of planning for net zero in Cambridge. So in 2015, Cambridge adopts a net zero action plan, right? So this is in advance of many other cities in this space. And it's really important for a city like Cambridge because 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings. You know, similar in observed in other cities as well. So the plan calls for all buildings, existing and new, to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 through a combination of efficiency, renewables, and electrification, as outlined in a series of policies and programs. And over the past year, we've been updating it through a stakeholder-led process. So one of the key actions was identifying sources of low carbon energy and then conducting a low carbon energy supply strategy. And so we wrapped up this project in 2018 and identified that about 60% of the energy used in Cambridge is for heating, cooling, and hot water, right? So it's a thermal energy demand of these buildings. And similarly, it's about 57% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there's a wide range of how we get our thermal energy in Cambridge. So district energy supplies some of those core areas of the university campuses, and we expect that those campuses will remain on district energy systems going forward. At the same time, we see potential for new district energy systems, potentially, in some of the large development areas that you can see in the orange, blue, and green areas. But the vast majority of Cambridge buildings, so, you know, to ballpark maybe like 14 or 15,000 buildings out of 16,000 buildings in the city, are in that zone 2 blue area. And electrification is going to be the primary pathway for getting those buildings to decarbonization. So this led us to the Cambridge Renewable Thermal Study, in which we examined the pathways to electrification for all building types. And as you know, many of you have almost certainly lived in Cambridge at one point. Cambridge has a really wide variety of building types that we need to think about renewable thermal for. About half of the square footage we examined, that's just that electrification component, not the district energy's buildings. About half of that square footage is commercial buildings, and then the other half in our residential mix is a pretty wide variety of buildings. Only 7% of the homes in Cambridge are single family. Another 27% are in that 2 to 3 family space, and 2/3 of Cambridge households are in what we would consider a mid or large size multifamily building. So as we looked at different technologies for these different types of buildings, we identified a feasible path to electrification for each building type. So, from the largest office buildings down to the smallest buildings, there is a feasible pathway to electrification. This includes ducted or ductless mini splits for small residential and commercial buildings, and VRF, that's a variable refrigerant flow system, or an air to water system for our larger buildings. But we do observe that for some of the larger buildings, it is a more intensive, a more extensive project that will often need to be timed with deeper renovation. And it kind of fits into that longer capital investment cycle that you might see in a larger building. We've seen the potential for higher costs, as Harvey identified, and potential demand charges, especially in that multifamily space, that will affect so many Cambridge buildings. These are buildings that will be moving from gas to electricity for a primary heating load, and they would be needing an amount of electric capacity that is really not at all present in the current rate structure for multifamily buildings. We've seen that efficiency in solar can play a key role in cost control as well. Efficiency in lowering the demand needed in the sizing of the equipment. And then seeing that solar and heat pumps is really the cheapest way of providing heat to a building in Massachusetts. We've also looked at resiliency opportunities and challenges, understood the need to plan for grid investment and coordination, and also start to think about the critical role of equity in this work. Cambridge is a city of many different housing types, of many different ownership types, a city that's 64%, a city in which 64% of households are renting their home. And so we need to think very critically about how equity fits into decarbonization. So there are other places that are also thinking about the same sort of energy transformation. And through my sabbatical work, I was able to understand some of the work that's happening in Germany. And while there are a lot of different pieces in a different context that are happening, hopefully we can start to identify some pieces that are relevant to the Cambridge context. So the German energy transformation, or the Energiewende, is maybe it's a term you've heard. It's really a sort of an economy-wide transition in how we use energy. And while it was coined as a term in the 1990s, it really became a federal commitment in 2010. And there are these three pillars, we might say, of the Energiewende. One is efficiency first, right? So reducing the amount of energy we use. The second is supplying that energy from renewable sources. And perhaps that's been the most visible success of Energiewende, with a 46% renewable share in 2020 and growing since then. And the third is, really the most exciting to me in some ways. And what it is sector coupling is the provision of renewable electricity to where and when it's needed. So not just to the end uses where it's needed, but also at the time that it's needed, right? And so this is where you can get into things like shifting the load and tapping into the role of storage. So in this example, this is a community utility in Hanover, and they have they are procuring wind energy to supply their EV charging stations, right? And so tanken Sie sauber means fill up clean, and so you have this sort of direct connection of wind energy into the EV charging network. But the challenges are very similar. So there are very deep incentives. You can get a €120,000 loan for energy renovations to your home. Yet only 1% of buildings are renovated each year, and only about a third of those, so 1/3 of 1%, are renovated to a level that is sufficient for decarbonization and for 2050 readiness. And so in contrast, that 42% of renewable electricity, only about 13% of heating is renewable. And so there's a need to renovate millions of buildings each year. So this is where we enter the Wärmewende, which is the heating decarbonization transformation. And it is a national strategy with local implementation. So we see a lot of cities and community utilities taking the lead in implementing this work. One of the early successes is that heat pumps are already the most common form of heating in new construction in Germany. More common than gas furnaces, more common than wood pellet or oil or anything like that. And we're also starting to see a push towards community level heat planning. This is effectively a law in the Netherlands, and these same sort of principles are being rolled out in Germany in a way where the local context, local sources of waste heat, local building types are all being brought into a community level heat planning process. And it's also a multi-sectoral transformation where we're looking at partners in the nonprofit space and technology and industry being brought together in a heat transformation dialogue. Some of the near-term initiatives, there are new financing tools at the federal level, new deep incentives for electrification, such as a 40% rebate for oil conversion and a couple of other cases, and a real emphasis on advising, moving from the sort of do-it-yourself approach to really supporting people in identifying opportunities and conducting as deep a retrofit as possible. So there are a lot of ideas in this space that are being tested and rolled out. We definitely don't have time to get into all of them, but I can focus on a couple of key themes that I think we can draw upon and I can dig into in the next section. But building performance standards, basically a requirement for existing buildings to start achieving decarbonization targets. Those are being discussed in the German context. And last month, the EU rolled out a draft directive that would implement building performance standards at a continent level. New financing mechanisms, because financing this transition and reaping the long-term savings is going to be a really important part of implementation. The digitalization of the heat supply, so thinking about grid interactivity and sort of the appropriate signals for when and how heat is used, and the delivery of decarbonization through new entities focused on that at the local level. So which of those pieces can we draw upon, and sort of what are we working on now? And so I'll touch on a couple of things that we're working on in Cambridge, and I'm happy to dig into them more during the Q&A. So we're working on, right now, a retrofit advising program, providing advising on project development, working with pre-vetted heat pump installers, helping people review quotes, and we are seeing a tremendous amount of interest in heat pumps and heat pump water heaters through this program. Similarly, we're providing advising to the multifamily retrofit space, and have been for a couple of years, doing more comprehensive retrofit planning from buildings for buildings from 5 to 50 units. We are also working on building performance standards in Cambridge, and this would really be the single most impactful action in our net zero action plan update. By focusing on the largest buildings in Cambridge, we're focusing on about 1,100 buildings. We'd be addressing about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions in the city. A draft was submitted to City Council in November, and the requirements would place buildings on a trajectory to full decarbonization by 2050 in 5-year increments. And again, the impact of focusing on these buildings and institutions would really, drive the most decarbonization impact in Cambridge's work. For buildings below that BUTO threshold, we're looking at transaction points and investigating the role that natural turnover points in a building's life cycle, such as sales and renovations, can play in decarbonization, and how we can identify opportunities there for a deep retrofit and couple that with project support. We're also working on a community microgrid concept in the Port neighborhood of Cambridge to serve the roles of decarbonization and resiliency through the deployment of individual systems for solar and storage. This really fits into that electrification piece as well, because we are combining solar, storage, electrification, and aggregating those assets to create a revenue stream in a community-owned entity. So as we look ahead, and this is my last slide, there are questions that we want to keep in mind as we roll out the next phase of decarbonization planning. There's questions about technology, what mix of electrification, investment, shared systems, demand side reduction, such as the digitalization of heat, will achieve decarbonization. The second question is equity. Decarbonization represents a major energy transformation that we're rolling out in a region that is constrained by housing affordability. So how do we avoid exacerbating those challenges? And as we think about things like the phase out of the gas system and the drawdown of the gas system into a potential stranded asset, how do we avoid burdening the most vulnerable households with those impacts? And finally, what role can cities and community entities play in the role of an equitable scale delivery of decarbonization, whether that's through an aggregation model or a community delivery mechanism? This is something that we're seeing in other US cities and following very closely as you think about how to achieve decarbonization at scale for buildings and residents in Cambridge. All right, I'll wrap it up there.
Thank you, Nikhil, and then Harvey before that. Wow, I think we could have a couple hours to discuss these things. There's so much there. So let's just wait for everybody to connect. We'll get to the Q&A quickly, and I can see that there's some very concrete questions that people have in the audience. But one of the things that impressed me in what I'm hearing and seeing is, this is a complex, many dimensions. To get this successfully to where it needs to be in a matter of a few decades, there just seems like there are a tremendous amount of goals to be met and barriers, right? Including one of them seems to me one of the toughest is inertia, right? There's so many people that need to be involved. There's a lot of cost involved for some aspects of these things. People are busy with their lives, so probably most people are not going to deal with this until it's right in their face. A need to replace an old pump or an old system and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the issue of vendors being up the curve of the challenge and being educated enough, and because the easiest thing is to provide the advice that you're most familiar with that you've been doing. So getting that transformation. So I don't know.
That actually leads right into a couple of the questions, Ramon.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Replacing 1 million systems requires manufacturing 1 million units, and how does the manufacturing happen, and how much environmental impact does it have? There is also a question in here about training the workforce to get it done. So the actual implementation, Nikhil and Harvey, do you have some further comments on those two questions?
Well, I'll start off. Yeah, there are definitely supply chain issues, and that wasn't directly an answer to that question, but having the supply chain match what consumers need, both from the standpoint of equipment, which is closer. I don't really think, I haven't studied in detail, I don't really think that the carbon intensity of the manufacturer is substantial in relation to the climate benefits, but I am concerned that the systems are not well designed. There was another question about how do we put these on urban housing where we're constrained in various ways. So there are places where the technology needs to improve in terms of adjustments, not in terms of major invention, but adjustments. But this goes to more Ramon's question. There are places where the service industry needs to scale up and become more able to provide something that makes this easy and painless and financed and risk-free and vanilla. The only way you get to 1 million is if it's really straightforward. And we have really good answers for that, at least in terms of suburban single-family housing, in terms of the kind of housing that Nikhil's talking about in Cambridge and the variety. We don't always have really good answers. And I guess I'll stop my first response there.
Yeah, I agree with everything Harvey said. I think the labor question is, the workforce question is an important part of this. I don't know the precise statistic off the top of my head, but I think people say in the Northeast that about 40 to 50% of the HVAC workforce is expected to retire in the next 5 to 7 years, right? And this comes at a time when we really need to ramp up that workforce. And so what we've been seeing with the Cambridge Clean Heat program is that it is a little bit, challenging to get installer bandwidth. And we've had to develop sort of very dedicated relationships with installers to be able to serve the need and have people who are responsive to Cambridge residents. But I agree with Harvey in that, we need to make this model a lot more sort of accessible and turnkey for people, right? And we're seeing, whether it's single family homes, but also in the larger buildings, we're starting to see models emerge where people are, having these systems put in as a financing and equipment package, and seeing sort of turnkey services, and in some cases for larger buildings, providing heat pumps and decarbonization as a service, as a lease almost, right?
Service, and also just really before we even start electrifying, make sure that the home is efficient. There's an awful lot of just construction, retrofitting, electrical systems. There's a question in here, upgrading the electric system, which I myself have done because I wanted a heat pump. So all kinds of trades and all kinds of jobs can be generated by this, and we really do need a lot of workforce training. What other questions are open here?
Another quick thing that I know that has come up and related to that deep cold part of the slides that you presented, Harvey. The question often comes up in places like New England, you know, where recently we had a pretty cold snap, and that's not that rare. People are used to, well, if there's a power failure or something, at least the other stuff is working. But when everything's electrified, a power failure means everything fails. I know that some people in the electricity business and all that stuff say that that's manageable. It's a matter of redundancy or this or that. But how do you see that? You know, that issue of, you know, it becoming, if you have a power failure that lasts more than X amount of hours in a place like New England, and it means that not only no electricity but no heating, that becomes a political issue faster than anybody can imagine.
Yeah, well, the challenge of winter peak is both a quantity challenge and it's also a resilience, health, and safety issue. I mean, it's certainly worse to lose heat when it's below zero outside than to lose air conditioning on a hot summer day. And so the grid needs to be ready for it from the standpoint of resilience and have the capacity. And this is really one of the key challenges when you start adding 1 million heat pumps, right? Is that small differences, like 99% of the time, you know, you have a heat pump that's carrying the heat, but that 1%, it needs resistance backup. And if that 1% is true of 1 million heat pumps and they all turn on at that time, there's this explosion in demand because the electric resistance backup has a coefficient of performance of 1. So all of a sudden, the loads explode. And if you may have noticed in the graph how the loads exploded in Texas last year, it's because they had regular heat pumps and they all went to their resistance backup. So we have to not lose heat. It's a political issue, it's a health and safety issue, is not to lose it. We have to have a resilient system. And that's one of the advantages of having a dual fuel system and considering battery storage at home or something like that. So you have some way, you can't really carry your heat very long if you're using resistance backup. It'll suck the battery dry in minutes. But if you have a Tesla Powerwall, or you can draw electricity out of your car battery or something like that, you can keep your backup, you know, gas hydronic system going for days. So it's really important to think about those solutions together, and resilience is right on the top of the list. And besides, in the middle of the winter, in the coldest days, we have no solar electricity in real time. And often we don't have any wind to speak of in real time.
There was a specific question in here that compares, from Jeff Berner, that compares Washington State's cheap electric rates and the use of resistance heating with a push to try and get legislation that would mandate use of heat pumps in new residential construction. Natural gas utilities and pipe fitter labor unions are opposing it. Now, I know that there has been talk and experimentation here and in Germany, I think. It's not even experimentation in Germany on district heat that is possibly coming from geosource heat pumps. But the specific question Jeff had, how is Cambridge addressing the economic and the political issues of you know, can you just mandate new electrification of new construction? Nikhil.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess there are a couple of questions there to dig into. So first of all, at the moment, you know, in Massachusetts, the authority for the building code rests with the state. So the city of Cambridge, as has been seen in Brookline stuff, does not have the ability to mandate all electric construction, absent changes in state law, which, as Harvey mentioned, or might have mentioned earlier, there was a hearing actually today about sort of enabling cities and towns to make that decision. You know, for new construction, in major renovation, putting in heat pumps is kind of and going all electric you're hitting it out of the park, right? Because you're designing a home or you're designing a building that is built at such a high level of efficiency based, as driven by code, that heat pumps are sort of the obvious solution for heating that building. So I think the economic case there is clear, and as a result, the political case has generally been aligned with that. Is there sort of more follow-up there, Sarah, that I should dig into?
I don't, Jeff, do you have more comment that you could put in another question, or we could move to another one?
Yeah, I mean, I think for new construction, our planning process and everything very clearly identifies that as soon as there's a net zero stretch code available in Massachusetts, it would be appropriate for Cambridge to adopt it. The harder part is, of course, all of the existing buildings, which is the majority of buildings.
Okay, and the second part had to do with the workforce that's needed to do these. What happens to the old workforce, the oil distributors in New England, the gas fitters in Washington State? So maybe the two of us can talk, or we could talk a little more about the idea of district heat and why the transfer from being a gas supplying company to being a therm supplying company, an energy supplying company, makes some sense. Harvey and Nikhil, I suspect you both have a little bit of comment
I'll
on
speak to it, and then Nikhil, as well. The concept of having geothermal on a home by home basis, and particularly in an urban area, isn't that likely, to the extent that we can build community geothermal loops and have those connect to our heat pumps. We have that solution for the red zone, and it's apparently possible, but not convenient right now. That if you run right out and buy some Mitsubishi ductless mini splits and you put them on your house, that someday when National Grid offers us a community ambient water loop, that you can do something on the outside of that unit and turn it into a water source heat pump. It looks like it's possible, but not convenient. We do need the technology so that the 1 million heat pumps that go in this decade can be converted in the next decade when utilities start providing these geothermal water loops to systems that'll work all winter. There were some questions about how do you get systems to work all winter? And one way is to have an extremely efficient home. And certainly new construction should all be extremely efficient. So you're all set. Your heat pump, your air source heat pump should be able to all work all winter. It's really hard to get a lot of existing homes to that level of efficiency. I mean, you have to basically reside the house. And that's something that people aren't going to do at the drop of a hat. So we have air source heat pumps, and if you do the mass save types of efficiency, you can get down to 15 degrees, 100% with a good air source heat pump. But then you need the backup, unless you get to the point in the next decade where we can start attaching these groundwater loops. So the hope is we can turn the gas industry, which really should eventually not exist because of the climate implications, into an industry that provides a good thing that we need with essentially the same skills and the same tools. And since these folks know how to put pipes in the ground and run a system and manage the billing and all those kind of things, they are certainly an excellent candidate to build out a community groundwater system.
Yeah, I agree. We've been participating, as Harvey has, in the HEAT MA conversation around this. So HEAT is a nonprofit advocacy organization that's been really pushing the utilities in Massachusetts to pilot shared network geothermal. And right, the advantages for grid peaking, and the efficiency are tremendous, but it also draws on the same skill set, the same labor pool that would otherwise be, building gas lines. So, I think that's part of it. I mean, we do see in Germany that the concept of network geothermal, I think, Sarah, you were mentioning this question, that is, out of pilot stage and is being implemented by utilities, and that that creates the need for a workforce to do some of that installation work. I mean, at the moment, we're also seeing that a lot of oil companies are the ones installing heat pumps. So, in Maine, for example, I think oil companies have been a big part of installing heat pumps as sort of a transition strategy. But what the long-term role there is a good question.
I noticed we'd had from earlier a couple of related questions or comments that have to do with the reliability of the equipment itself. Larry Rich writes, aside from the electricity reliability thing, talks about having put heat pumps for cooling and heating in a 6-unit apartment house 6 years ago without a backup system, and they worked well. They installed and so on, and they worked well in the cold weather. But the practical problem is the maintenance. It says 4 of the 6 failed over that period, and there's a problem finding qualified service people, and that's expensive, and so on. And Alison Friedman talks about a new mini split system. The loss is charged due to some leak, and then some other issues. So the equipment reliability seems also to be an issue, and I guess I mean that's an industry side issue, but somehow has to be elevated to the point where they bring that up, both from the manufacturing of quality, but also in the provision of service, right, in terms of maintenance and so on. I don't know what the best way to incentivize those are.
Now, well, I'll mention that we're building experiential databases. I appreciate those comments. I haven't heard, anecdotally, lots of issues with maintenance, at least on the more recent ductless mini splits. Answering someone else's question, certainly if you have a central duct system, you have a central heating system, or you have a central air conditioning system now, popping a cold weather heat pump in exactly the same place where the air conditioner used to be and using it works great. And it's actually less expensive than the ductless mini split solution. So we're not arguing not to do that. As a matter of fact, we're talking about whether or not there should be any air conditioners sold that aren't also heat pumps. One of the things being considered at national level is to offer a small upstream incentive, because that's all it's going to take for, in this supply constrained, supply chain issue world, that heat pumps are all that's in stock. And that means that when you call up and say, I need an air conditioner, you'll end up getting a cold weather heat pump, which doesn't cost very much more at all. It's the same labor in that case. So there are solutions that don't have really any technology risk, but there are some. We're developing experiential databases. The Heat Smart Alliance in Massachusetts, the municipal utilities in Massachusetts are doing some things to help and to coach and to learn from everyone who's putting these installations out. And so to see if we can, improve the nature of understanding all the details of getting the work done well. And this is a role that Mass Save is going to play and has played in insulation and other things in the past, and it'll be part of their job in the future.
Yeah, I'll just add briefly to that, we've been working with Cambridge residents who are installing heat pumps, of course, and their experiences have been mostly positive, and I think part of guiding people is helping them work with an installer who's going to provide the follow-up service that they may need, right? So I think there's that aspect of it. We are seeing with some of the larger building models that I mentioned, such as block power, that provision of heat as a service, or provision of heat pumps as a service, kind of takes the risk onto the provider there. And so they're providing not the equipment per se, but the heat. So they're taking care of the maintenance, parts replacement, whatever is needed, which is an interesting model.
I see there are a lot of questions. Sarah, we can't hear you. No.
Well, I'll respond to one while she's getting back on. So I see, I'll mention the name Rick Clemenzi, who I know is an expert in ground source heat pumps. Hi, Rick. And Allison Friedman had a discussion about getting to the high numbers that we were talking about, and the fact that there's a very low turnover rate on heating equipment. First of all, it's not quite as low as what they were looking at, but the magic that makes $1 million possible is that the majority of homes in Massachusetts don't have central air conditioning and want them. So the thing that's causing the rush on the market for ductless mini splits is the 75% of homes that are finding this new solution as a good retrofit way to get air conditioning in an existing, particularly multi-story, ductwork house, which is dominant in this area. So while people are getting this air conditioning they want, the opportunity to get the right kind of mini split so that they can provide 100% of the heat economically with the heat pump down to at least 15 degrees Fahrenheit is essentially the solution that makes it easy for us to get to $1 million by 2030 and getting some fraction of the heating turnover that's going to happen between now and then.
I wanted to quick add the fact, can you hear me now? I wanted to quick add the fact that I have steam radiators as my backup. And so in order to be able to take advantage of geothermal, ground source, I would have to change to baseboard radiators. And apparently the new baseboard heat loops are high temperature, and what you need for heat pumps is medium temperature. So some of the internal changes that have to happen in houses that are not fully ducted is going to be pretty important. A quick moment, if Harvey and Nikhil have anything further to say, and I just wanted to sign off with a couple of items from EESN. But thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. And this has been a real pleasure with the folks I can see on the screen and all the names I can see on the participant list. Thank you all for coming by for this. And we had to fire hose it, so there's a lot more that we can talk about for those of you who are interested. But the bottom line is keep an eye on it. I don't know if I mentioned that this new Mass Save program that Sarah has been pointing to, that's coming out shortly, is going to offer huge incentives for people to put these heat pumps on their homes. And this is true in other northeastern states as well. So it's something that the markets can be looking at. We'll be communicating with you, we'll be communicating with government, communicating with Sabrina Shankman and the Globe, so that people can get the information they need to do it well.
Nikhil, another farewell?
No, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's been a great conversation. I think what we can see is that there's a lot of learning to do in this space, and there are a lot of questions that people have raised, which are really important questions to think about. And I think we are, at a moment where we need to think not only about the short-term strategy, but also the longer-term strategy and what that transition looks like. So it's an exciting time to be working in this space, and I look forward to hearing more from EESN members about it.
Thank you all. And Ramon, great job. And
I'll just say really quickly that I'm sorry to the audience that we didn't get to all the questions. So I think we tried to get many of them. I guess we can copy them and pass them to the speakers, at least as feedback, right?
Yes, we can try and follow up on questions that weren't answered. Thank you. Yes, that's very good. I just wanted to say in our last steps, we've run out of time. However, EESN does these monthly webinars. We are always looking for ideas and good speakers. We always connect alums in these webinars, so it's not one person talking about their own issue. for our monthly webinars, EESN groups around our network do offer many, many webinars and talks on specific issues with specific speakers. On February 8th, we are sponsoring a workshop on with the En-ROADS simulation policy work tool that the Sloan School and Climate Interactive have developed, a systems dynamic view. And on the 24th of February, we are sponsoring a webinar whose preliminary title is Scaling Up the Energy Transition, Investment and Innovation. We have Noor Gananfar, MCP 19, who is at the Greentown Labs in Houston, and Bella Tankanaji, MBA 15, who is Director of Climate Finance at Climate Policy Initiative. So we hope you'll join us again. We are very glad that you all came today, and this has been a really fun and exciting event. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, everyone.